They said, don't put out another video. It's too much. It's not fair to the other YouTube channels. You're going to blow up too fast and you're going to be lost in that haze of success and fame. Well, despite that denouncement, I've succumbed to the public pressure for more. We're now at 2 subscribers, 20 views. Most of those views have been myself. It's probably me just watching this back. But I can feel it in the air though. There's an undercurrent of a real appreciation from people. So I thought I'd give them what they want, you know. And here's the second video about late bloomers. It's going to be about Eckhart Tolle, the great spiritual teacher, loved by millions of people around the world. And perhaps the person that I go to the most when I'm experiencing mental anguish. Him and David Goggins, which is a kind of yin-yang situation I've got going on, where they're superficially the opposite, but I think that they arrive at the same place somehow. I'll do a video on David Goggins in the future, but for now, Mr. Eckhart Tolle, who was born in 1948 in Germany, post-Second World War, lives there until he's 13 years old when he moves to Spain to live with his father, I believe. And he's homeschooled, teaches himself mostly, until his late teens when he moves to London and starts teaching English to students there. He then enrolls in the University of London, and then by the time he's in his mid to late 20s, he is a postgraduate student at Cambridge University. So by the end of that decade, he is materially successful, a bona fide academic at, you know, one of the world's premier institutions. But deep down, he is extremely sad. He's experiencing bouts of severe depression, suicidal thoughts, paralyzing anxiety. And on a night in 1977, when he is 29 years old, he experiences what he calls the dark night of the soul, where he wakes up in an acute sense of dread and fear and not wanting to go on with his life. And mystically, a voice comes to him which says, resist nothing. Now at this point, I don't know whether he fell back asleep or not, but he wakes up from that experience at some point and he sees the world completely anew, afresh, bright, colourful. And all the suffering he's been experiencing dissipates. And he calls this the death of his ego and the death of conceptual thinking. And then after that, he spends the next 5 months wandering around the streets of London. He gives up his possessions, he moves out of Cambridge, leaves the university, and by all intents and purposes becomes homeless, but he is experiencing a sense of deep tranquility and peace and euphoria. Now that 5 months then bleeds into the next 2 or 3 years, where he's living on park benches, doesn't have any possessions. But again, this feeling of tranquility stays with him and has stayed with him throughout his life subsequent to that dark night of the soul. So it gets a bit sketchy around this time as to what he does, but what I have been able to figure out is that in the next 5 years, at some point he moves to Glastonbury, is not making any money at all and has to rent out his room, but people begin to kind of recognize that this is a special person who has achieved some form of enlightenment, and they come to be taught by him. But it isn't until he moves to Canada and then publishes his book, The Power of Now, I think in 1997, so he's around 50 years old, when it first gets published, and then 2 years later it gets published to a wider audience and then gets picked up by Oprah and the world knows him. So he's not 50 years old until the world starts to know about Eckhart Tolle, but certainly at 29 he experiences this psychic shift. So he certainly is a late bloomer, but I don't think Eckhart Tolle would agree with the idea probably of this channel, in the sense that fundamentally you shouldn't be looking at time and age and biography. He now lives in a sense of deep presence with no past and no future. But you know, I'm doing it for the purposes of this channel. But the lessons to learn from Eckhart Tolle are profound. profound and timeless lessons about letting go, not resisting, and not seeing your future before it has happened or unfolded in the present. So this is a kind of story, yes, of a late bloomer, but really of an idea that transcends time and age and can be helpful to anyone at any time in their life, which is the majority of suffering that we experience in the Western world, certainly, is to do with what's going on up here. Overthinking, conceptual thinking, dramatizing about the past and the future. And I certainly do look to Eckhart Tolle as the primary example of someone who's been able to escape that. I mean, even listening to him, he's the one person where even listening to his voice and being in his presence via the medium of YouTube even, you can kind of experience some of that. And you feel a dissipation of your own thoughts and suffering. So he's someone to check out, and he's certainly someone who belongs in this list of late bloomers.